Good evening. My name is Jim Carleton, and I am a consultant and former executive director with the Association of Migraine Disorders, located in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. We are a private, not-for-profit 501c3. Furthermore, I am the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act officer for the Tri-County Community Action Agency, also located in Rhode Island in the north central portion of the state. Also, on a more personal side, apart from those professional credentials, I am the caretaker of a disabled person with a chronic pain situation. So I'm kind of seeing this from both sides, both the personal side and the professional side. So what I'd like to do tonight, and I believe the way our Facebook Live session has been titled, is reasonable accommodations and implications it may have for the migraineur. How do you survive in the workplace when you've got such a crippling impairment? So having said that about myself, and I'll refresh those credentials partway into the presentation. I think it's probably good if we start with a few definitions, just to get our terms straight a bit. Let's start with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law, was signed into effect in 1990, and as you might expect, it prohibits discrimination against folks with disabilities. Actually, probably more correct to refer to them as impairments. And it also provides similar protection as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protects folks against discrimination based on race, religion, sex, natural origin, and other characteristics. Also, probably maybe not as well known, it does protect the actions of the caretakers of those individuals, especially in the service of the disabled person that they may be working for. So it's kind of a broad-reaching law. And it's most often referred to as folks, getting on disability, basically getting their disability acknowledged by the Social Security Administration, and getting some sort of financial remuneration on a monthly basis because of that. And we can get back to that in a minute, but let's just talk for a second about a little bit more about this whole idea of reasonable accommodations, and what employers may be required to do in regards to making it easier for a person with disabilities to continue working, to survive in the workplace, because it can be very difficult, especially when we're talking with migraines in particular. Are they episodic or are they chronic? Are they happening at least 15 times a month or somewhat less? Either way, they're crippling, and especially if you've got some of the other impairments that go along with it, such as vertigo and nausea, photophobia, problems with lights and things like that. It can be a very nasty situation indeed. So the reasonable accommodations that we're talking about here are essentially anything that is going to make it a little bit easier for a person to remain in the workplace, to remain a part of the workforce, and remain productive. Because as I'm sure you know, when someone does go on disability, yes, you can work, and there are some abilities to test that to see how much you can work. But for the most part, you can basically assume that you're going to be kind of out of the game for a while. Now, getting on disability with for migraines, or for anything for that matter, is not often what you might want to think of as the most positive outcome going. I'll just say this from a purely fiscal point of view, the average payout for disability, and this is a particular type of disability, SSDI, where somebody's been paying in because they've been working, is about $1,100 a month. Now, you might want to think to yourself, is that a workable wage? Okay, is that something that either I or my household or whoever is looking to me for support can indeed afford to live on? Well, for that reason, you might want to consider, getting disability, getting that impairment recognized as not something that you want to try almost first, unless it's totally crippling and you've already gone down that path. Now, when I speak of a reasonable accommodation, okay, what might you think is a reasonable accommodation? Well, a reasonable accommodation, and this is pretty much, quoting the Social Security webpage, sort of, it's assistance or changes to a position in the workplace that'll make it easier for a person to continue working, despite a disability. Under the ADA, especially, and again, if you have to have more than 15 employees in order to qualify as an employer, you're required to work with the employee to try and find some form of reasonable accommodation to allow them to continue working. Okay, it only makes sense. Let's not go to the ultimate right off the bat of getting a monthly payment and trying to work a few more days when, who knows, maybe some things can be done in the workplace that might be reasonable accommodations. Now, depending upon what your disability is, it can be as easy as getting something to possibly help open a door, a ramp. I mean, these are the accommodations that we see that probably are more striking, that we notice. However, with migraines, migraines again are oftentimes referred to as the invisible disease, are they not? So it stands to reason that many of the accommodations might be, a little more difficult to see also, in terms of, what are the things that are going to lessen a person's load when they're on migraine? Well, one of the ways that we can back into this is the whole notion of, what are the triggers, okay? Now, one of the biggest triggers for migraine is that of stress. It's very hard to engineer a stress-free workplace, okay? All workplaces have stress, so I would say where you go for reasonable accommodations here might be more in the line of, personal relations or something along those lines, and working with your HR department to keep, stress levels to a minimum, although my guess is, most good HR departments are working to mitigate that in any event. So what are some of the other areas that we might look at as reasonable accommodations? Well, two things that jump to mind for me right away. One is fragrance. For a lot of people, perfume, aftershave, any kind of fragrance worn by men or women can be serious triggers. So that's a pretty easy fix. I know where I work, my full-time job, in the in the staff safety handbook, we have a rule that says can't wear fragrances to work. That's done absolutely for folks with, in accommodating people with migraines. Another example of something that you might do in terms of a reasonable accommodation could be getting softer lighting, more natural lighting. I worked with a woman a number of years ago who suffered from debilitating migraines, but as we found, one of the major triggers was these glaring fluorescent lights that were shining down on her most of the day. She was a counselor and she was stuck in this room without any windows, no natural light, and just these glaring fluorescent lights. So what we did, and not for a whole lot of money, mind you, was come up with some natural lighting. and that kind of helped. Okay, that did kind of help. Two other areas, depending upon how badly your migraines take you out of the game and what your work is structured like, is working remotely or working from home. There may be days when just the nausea or the pain, or all the side effects and all the actual effective pain that goes along with a migraine. I shouldn't even call them side effects, since some of them can be just as powerful as an impairment, can be just as bad. So some folks can make arrangements or a schedule to allow you to work from home. That is possible also. Again, reasonable accommodations kind of means that you're going to have to talk with your employer, try and come up with something that both of you can live with, that's going to allow you to possibly keep working. Now, one other I left out, which is there's no evidence-based proof that this absolutely works, but some people swear by it, and that's your seating. Some people swear by raising the monitor or working in stand-up chairs can mitigate onset of migraines, either chronic or episodic. Some people swear by it. It's very hard to say. Again, reasonable accommodations can be a very, very individual thing. There has to be certainly some give and take on both sides. So having said that, well, how do you, what qualifies for a disability? Is there a list of conditions or impairments where you can just run down the list and say, oh yes, I've got this or I've got that, so I'm definitely disabled, and I need to I need to take a look at this, need to get an attorney, or I need to fill out an application myself. And yes, there are some lists, okay, where some folks might find conditions they might have, some extremely serious ones, where it might prove a little more easy sledding to get disability if that's necessary. However, keeping in mind that when we're defining them, it's more of a legal definition than a medical definition, and some folks find that sometimes a little tough to get their arms around. The law defines disability as the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity, also known as SGA, by reason of any medically determined physical or mental impairments, which can be expected to result in death, or which can be lasting or be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. Now, purposely, that kind of a broad definition does not mention any type of impairments by name, although digging deep enough, you certainly will find something like that. Pardon me. There certainly are some listings where you can find that, the blue list, and I believe migraines might be listed on that now. Although in reading through the literature, since it is a law, since eventually it's going to probably end up in front of a judge or some representative of the judicial process, that law is going to be looked at rather than just on the basis of a medical condition alone. Okay, so I'm just going to take a brief break here, since we only have a half an hour, and I'm going to again introduce myself. My name is Jim Carleton. I'm a consultant and former executive director with the Association of Migraine Disorders, a not-for-profit 501c3 located in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. We've been around since about 2012, and I was on board kind of from the beginning, helping to incorporate and write the original application for 501c3. Furthermore, in another job I hold, I am the Americans with Disabilities Act officer for the Tri-County Community Action Agency located in North Central Rhode Island, which again, I'm the person that they're going to go to when they're looking for reasonable accommodations, or if we're doing new building where we might have to take the ADA into account. Good example of that is very recently we built a a new employee staff lounge. Now, originally they had put a dishwasher in there that did not meet ADA requirements. What does that mean? It means that probably a person in a wheelchair was not able to easily operate, fill it, and in a sense, be an operator of that machinery without some struggle. So we had to they sent us the wrong one. We had to send that one out and get one back in there. And if you were to look at two pictures side by side, you'd see that that the knobs and the controls were clearly designed for a person who would have difficulty outside of a wheelchair or something along that nature.